What if I told you that one woman's private desires reshaped the destiny of nations? That beneath the shining monuments and dusty scrolls of history lies a truth too uncomfortable to admit, that empires are not only destroyed by armies, but by the choices of a single heart. Two of the greatest men of the ancient world, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, were not brought down by legions, but by the gaze of a woman whose beauty masked an intelligence sharper than any blade. Cleopatra of Egypt. To the Romans, she was a temptress. To her people, a savior. To history, a paradox. But when we strip away the myth and look at the cold mechanics of power, influence, and desire, her story reveals something far deeper. The devastating force of female hypergamy, written not in letters from the battlefield, but in treaties, betrayals, and the fall of kingdoms. History remembers Julius Caesar as the man who bent the world to his will, who crossed the Rubicon and toppled the Republic itself. But the truth is darker. For all his brilliance, his armies, his ruthless power, Caesar was still a man. And like all men, he carried insecurities that could be touched, amplified, and turned against him. And that is exactly what Cleopatra did. She was only 21 when she met him, yet she walked into his world not as a frightened girl, but as if the gods themselves had sent her. When her enemies tried to bar her from Caesar's palace, she refused to be turned away. Instead, she had herself smuggled inside, wrapped in a rug, unfurled at Caesar's feet, in a gesture so theatrical, so audacious, that the general could not help but be captivated. This was no ordinary queen. This was theater. This was the siren stepping onto her stage. Robert Greene tells us the siren's power lies in embodying fantasy, in becoming the living answer to what a man secretly craves. For Caesar, who at 52 was weary of battles and politics, Cleopatra was that fantasy. She was young, radiant, intelligent, and above all, different. She was Egypt itself, mysterious, sensual, dripping with symbols of a world far more exotic than his disciplined Rome. But Cleopatra didn't rely on beauty alone. She understood something crucial. Caesar's ego was not unshakable. Beneath the laurels and victories, he feared that he had not yet measured up to the greatest conqueror of them all, Alexander the Great. Cleopatra seized this insecurity and pressed it like a blade. She spoke of Alexander constantly, drew comparisons between him and Caesar, suggested subtly that his legacy was incomplete. In doing so, she planted the most dangerous seed: self-doubt. Cleopatra didn't simply praise Caesar. She made him feel inadequate, then offered herself as the key to greatness. With her at his side, Egypt behind him, and a dynasty that could rival Alexander's, perhaps Caesar could surpass even the man he idolized. She was no longer just a lover. She was a mirror reflecting back his deepest hunger, his most private wound, and promising to heal it. And so, the most powerful man in the world, the conqueror of Gaul, the terror of Rome's Senate, found himself conquered by a woman's psychology. Caesar, who was supposed to rule Egypt as Rome's master, instead became entangled, spending months in Alexandria, distracted from the storms brewing back home. Senators whispered that their leader was bewitched, that Cleopatra had enslaved him. They weren't entirely wrong, for Caesar gave her more than affection. He gave her power. Against Roman interests, he restored her to Egypt's throne, making her not just his mistress, but a queen in her own right. From that union came a son, Caesarion, the living symbol of a bond that would shake Rome to its core. Think about this: an entire empire with its legions and laws bent not because of a battlefield defeat, but because one woman knew how to touch a man's insecurity and wrap it in the language of destiny. Cleopatra didn't defeat Caesar with armies. She defeated him with imagination, by making him believe she was the missing piece to his immortality. This is female nature in its most dangerous form, the ability to turn a man's strength into weakness by touching the wounds he hides. Caesar thought he was expanding his empire. In truth, he was already caught in Cleopatra's game. When Julius Caesar was gone, Cleopatra turned her eyes toward another Roman titan, Mark Antony. He was bold, brash, adored by his soldiers, yet restless, always craving intensity. And Cleopatra knew exactly how to play to that hunger. Antony first summoned her as a political ally, but she understood that alliances are not forged in words alone. So she staged her entrance not as a queen, but as a goddess. Sailing up the Cydnus River, she appeared on a golden barge, its sails purple, its oars of silver, perfumed with incense so strong the winds themselves seemed enchanted. Cleopatra lay beneath a canopy, dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by attendants playing the roles of nymphs and cupids. Crowds filled the riverbanks, whispering that Venus had come to Earth, and at the center of it all, Mark Antony, so used to commanding attention, was now just another man standing in awe. This was Cleopatra's gift. She could transform herself into a vision that made ordinary life feel intolerably small. Rome, with its rigid discipline, iron laws, and endless campaigns, suddenly seemed cold, lifeless, colorless. Egypt, embodied by her, was alive, abundant, and overflowing with pleasure. In her presence, Antony's world of duty and military order dissolved into something intoxicating. Robert Greene observes that Antony was intoxicated, not only by Cleopatra's beauty, but by the universe she carried with her. She represented freedom from the stern world of Roman politics, offering a realm where he could indulge his desires without restraint. To a man who lived by the sword, she offered the dream of being worshipped, of existing in a reality where pleasure itself was sacred. Once Antony tasted this life, Rome could no longer satisfy him. He abandoned his responsibilities, spending winters in Alexandria, where Cleopatra hosted feasts so lavish that stories of them spread across the empire. She blended affection with withdrawal, affection with challenge, keeping him always off balance, always chasing the next high. But this was not mere indulgence, it was strategy. Cleopatra knew that Antony was drawn to spectacle, to grandeur, so she gave him Egypt not as a country, but as a stage on which he could play the role of a god. She called him the new Dionysus, clothed him in silk, let him bask in adoration. And the more he embraced her world, the further he drifted from his own. Once his armor became chains, his fellow generals mocked him, senators despised him, and Octavian, waiting patiently, watched Antony unravel. Yet Antony could not pull himself away. Cleopatra had reshaped his desires, redefined his sense of what life could be, until the thought of returning to cold, gray Rome felt like a death. And so a man who could have ruled Rome chose instead to serve Egypt's queen. He dressed as an Egyptian, granted her vast territories, and even declared Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, as the rightful heir of Julius Caesar, a direct challenge to Octavian. Every step drew him further from Rome, further from power, deeper into her orbit. This is the deeper truth of Cleopatra's game. She didn't conquer through force. She created a world so vibrant, so intoxicating, that men willingly abandoned everything for it. She did not chain Antony, she made him chain himself. In the end, what destroyed Antony was not weakness of body, but weakness of spirit. Cleopatra revealed the hunger he carried, the hunger for freedom from duty, for endless pleasure, for divine recognition, and then she fed it until it consumed him. empires fall when men forget themselves. Antony didn't lose to Octavian first. He lost to the woman who taught him that Rome was too small for his desires. As the years unfolded, Cleopatra's spell over Mark Antony deepened. He was no longer the decisive commander who inspired legions. He became a man divided, torn between two worlds, the iron discipline of Rome and the intoxicating freedom of Egypt. And with every choice, he drifted further from the empire that had once defined him. In Alexandria, Cleopatra surrounded Antony with constant abundance. Banquets stretched through the night, drenched in wine, music, and laughter. They invented games, formed secret societies, and dressed themselves as gods. Cleopatra called it the Society of the Inimitable Livers, a world of perpetual play. To the Romans, this was madness, a humiliation of their stern traditions. But to Antony, it was liberation. This was Cleopatra's genius. She did not force him into submission. She gave him the stage to indulge every desire he had buried under years of military discipline. She amplified his hunger until it swallowed his judgment. Rome was duty. Cleopatra was escape. And escape always tastes sweeter to a man already exhausted by obligation. But every escape carries a cost. The more Antony lived as a god in Alexandria, the more powerless he became in Rome. Senators whispered of betrayal. Octavian spread rumors of Antony giving away Roman lands to a foreign queen. And yet Antony, blinded by Cleopatra's world, dismissed the warnings. He convinced himself he could rule both Egypt and Rome, when in reality, he was losing both. Psychologists would later describe this as a loss of identity. A man so consumed by another's world that he forgets his own. Antony no longer set the terms of his life. He lived on Cleopatra's terms. His victories were hers, his titles hers, his loyalty hers. And the more he gave, the more Rome slipped from his grasp. Cleopatra, however, was not reckless. Her strategy was survival. Egypt had long been a prize fought over by empires. Alone, she could never withstand Rome. But by binding Antony to her, not through chains, but through desire, she turned one of Rome's most powerful men into her protector. In securing him, she secured Egypt. The tragedy was that Antony believed he was the master of this story. He thought he had chosen Cleopatra freely, out of passion. But passion is never free. What feels like choice is often compulsion, and what feels like love can be dependency in disguise. The more he needed her, the less capable he became of leaving her. By the time war came, Antony was already a weakened man. At Actium, when Octavian's forces clashed with his, it was not simply a battle of ships, it was a battle of loyalties. When Cleopatra's fleet retreated, Antony followed, abandoning his men in the midst of chaos. For a Roman general, this was unthinkable. But Antony could no longer imagine a life apart from her. He would rather lose an empire than lose the queen who defined his world. That moment sealed both their fates. Rome declared them enemies. Antony's honor collapsed, his armies deserted, and Octavian marched toward Alexandria. Surrounded, betrayed, stripped of power, Antony fell on his own sword. Cleopatra, seeing no path left, chose death by poison rather than humiliation in Rome's triumph. 2 lives consumed, 2 empires shaken, and at the center, a single woman whose brilliance lay not in armies or weapons, but in her ability to transform a man's desires into chains stronger than steel. This is the paradox of Cleopatra's game. She preserved Egypt for a time, but destroyed the man who could have ruled the world. Antony thought he was winning love. In truth, he was surrendering his empire. Cleopatra's story is not just about Egypt. nor about two men who lost everything for her. It is about something far older and more primal, the hidden psychology of how women can wield power without armies, thrones, or swords. On the surface, she seemed fragile, a queen ruling a small kingdom overshadowed by the Colossus of Rome. Yet she turned that weakness into her greatest weapon. She could not defeat men like Caesar or Antony through force, so she rewired the battlefield. She turned their own desires against them. Modern psychology gives us the language for this. Cleopatra tapped into what is called projective desire. A man does not simply see a woman as she is, but as a mirror of what he longs for most deeply. To Caesar, she was legacy, Egypt, the wealth of the Nile, the living symbol of conquest. To Antony, she was freedom from duty, indulgence without restraint, a world where he could play God. They weren't in love with Cleopatra as a person. They were in love with the part of themselves she allowed them to express. This is the first truth her story exposes. Men often surrender, not because of who a woman is, but because of what she awakens inside them. The second truth lies in contrast. Rome was a world of discipline, order, and iron control. Cleopatra embodied the opposite: abundance, color, chaos, mystery. Psychology calls this the principle of contrast effect. What feels ordinary fades. What feels rare becomes irresistible. For men raised in a world of stone and steel, Cleopatra's Egypt was an intoxicating dream. By embodying what Rome was not, she made herself unforgettable. The third truth is dependency. Cleopatra ensured that neither Caesar nor Antony could imagine life without her. She did not cling or beg. She expanded their worlds until she became the center of it. This is the subtlety of psychological control. True power is not holding someone by force, but reshaping their reality until they hold themselves there willingly. And finally, Cleopatra reveals the most unsettling truth of all. A woman's power does not always lie in conquest, but in collapse. She did not need to defeat Rome with armies. She needed only to divide its leaders, to make them fight each other while she stood at the center. She weaponized intimacy. She turned love into a lever, desire into a dagger, loyalty into poison. For Caesar, the price was Rome's suspicion. For Antony, it was his entire empire. Both men were remembered as great generals, but history whispers a different legacy, that a woman undid them not with force, but with psychology. And this is why Cleopatra still haunts history. She is not a cautionary tale about beauty. She is a revelation about strategy. She shows that power often wears the mask of love. That loyalty can be tested, not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments when desire whispers louder than reason. For men today, the lesson is not to fear women, but to understand the game, to recognize when your desires are being mirrored back at you, when escape looks sweeter than duty, when attachment turns into dependency, because every man carries within him the seeds of his own downfall. Cleopatra simply knew how to water them, and that is her eternal power. Not that she destroyed two empires, but that she revealed the timeless truth. Men do not fall to armies, they fall to themselves. And sometimes it is a woman who holds up the mirror